myself to think about actually being the first woman to receive this award, I was actually very sobered. I mean, 50 years, first woman. I refuse to believe that I was the first female exercise physiologist that finally met the standard of all the males that had won the award before me. And women have some very real and unique challenges to succeed in science, especially in academia, because the time of one's life when one is supposed to be most productive in academia, early in your career, when you're on the tenure track treadmill, that coincides with the biological window that women have to start and raise families. And so it's very, very difficult and challenging for women to try to figure out how to balance that. You know, I think things have gotten so much better than back in the day when I was on the tenure track treadmill. About 25 years ago, when I was sitting in the audience during the Honour Award acceptance speech, and I was sitting with a female colleague of mine, and we were both in the early stages of our tenure track appointments, and we both had young families and were juggling everything. And the man who won the award and was giving his acceptance speech, he basically honored his wife. It was a wonderful speech, like, don't get me wrong. He told everyone that there's no way he would have been able to win that award had it not been for his wife, because she was the one who looked after the kids, looked after the household, looked after all the scheduling of appointments and birthdays and managing everything that goes along with a household with young children. And he said if she hadn't done all that she had done, he would not have been able to be as successful in his own career. And it was a wonderful tribute. And at the end of the speech, my colleague and I, we just looked at each other and we just said, like, we need a wife. Since that time, I think we've made great strides in making it easier for women in science. But there's still that very real problem about that window of time when women have to have babies and raise them and devote the time that young children need and when they need their moms. And that's where we still have, I think, a little bit of work to do in order for women to feel that they can compete with men. I think women should step up more and nominate each other. It was a female colleague that nominated me, so I'm, extremely grateful to her for having done that. It's a much friendlier environment now for women in STEM, and that's a wonderful thing because women are as capable in the STEM fields as men are, and it's tragic to think that they're not choosing that field because they don't think that they would be able to compete with men. I think the next 10 years for women in STEM are going to be very positive. I think things are only going to get rosier. We're not going to step back. So hopefully we're only going to move forward and make things more friendly for women to be able to both achieve that life balance that they need when their families are young and yet still get success and recognition in their chosen field or profession. Being involved in a national association like CSEP has been extremely instrumental to making my career what it is today. Just having that organization for a sense of belonging is incredible. But the national conference is my favorite conference. I think in 35 years, I've maybe missed 2 of them, and it's a wonderful conference because it's not overly large, and that's one of the things that makes it so great. So you actually can chat and talk with a lot of people. You get a lot of support from your peers at a conference like CSEP, and you have those wonderful opportunities to network and talk science, because Canada's a big country and it's tough to kind of interact with colleagues. It's hard within your own university, let alone the country. So being part of a national organization gives you a tremendous sense of belonging. We're so fortunate we have a wonderful journal associated with our national association. So yeah, it's been absolutely instrumental to my career. I became a CSEP member when I was a master's student, so in the very early 80s, probably 1982 or 1983. Being a CSEP member is important because it makes you a proud Canadian scientist in exercise physiology. There is no other association in our country that reflects the expertise that the members of CSEP have. And what's also quite unique about CSEP is it has both the research aspect and the professional practice, which allows us to kind of always have on our radar that what we are doing as researchers is being translated to the public. It was during my time as president that I was right involved in the development and release of the revised Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines. And I think it was that experience with the Physical Activity Guidelines that was not only a really proud moment because it was so impactful, and it was so wonderful to see even the rest of the world use our systematic reviews to develop their own guidelines that were very similar to our own. But it also launched in me an interest in physical activity guideline development, so I got involved in the development process for some guidelines after that for some different special populations. CSEP chose to use a very rigorous physical activity guideline process in developing their most recent guidelines. So we followed the gold standard of guideline development, which is the AGREE process. That's an acronym. And this process is very systematic. It involves a panel of experts. It involves consumer and stakeholder involvement. It involves doing very thorough systematic review and then evaluating the evidence before you actually come up with the guidelines. So you have to go through all these steps to kind of develop your final guideline process. In so doing, you can be absolutely assured that your guidelines are truly reflective of the evidence that's out there. And I think that's what makes them so strong. At the same time, sometimes people might argue that they aren't rigorous enough, like, because people could do more than the guidelines and get better benefits, and that's absolutely true. But the physical activity guidelines and using that AGREE process is just to set your kind of minimal threshold for what you need to do in order to experience fitness and health benefits. And it's a much more evidence-based process than just having a group of scientists sit around a table and go, well, I think we should do this, and and they go, well, I think we should do that. And at least we know that the guidelines are based on peer-reviewed, published evidence, and the most quality evidence is rated highest in terms of how it's going to inform the guidelines. The MAC Wheelers is a community-based exercise program for people with spinal cord injury. We call them the MAC Wheelers because they use wheelchairs to get around. I'm really proud of that program because it evolved from a randomized controlled trial that I did on exercise way back in the late 90s. I think I started that trial looking at the effects of exercise on a variety of physical fitness outcomes and quality of life outcomes and health outcomes in people with spinal cord injury. And at the end of the study, we were able to confirm our hypotheses that physical activity was great, which it is for most populations. And the people that were in our study, they didn't want to stop exercising. They didn't want to stop coming. And the people that had been randomized to the control group really wanted to come and exercise. And so I started that MAC Wheelers program at McMaster kind of as a way to just be able to continue to offer what we had shown to be so effective. So it was kind of like a really optimal way of knowledge translation right away. The other neat thing about the MAC Wheelers program and all of our programs that run through the Physical Activity Center of Excellence at McMaster, or the PACE, is that we use our undergraduate kinesiology students as volunteer trainers. It's a true win-win situation for both the students and the people that they're helping out. Just a model of community engagement that also incorporates both research and education within it. So it's a wonderful feature of McMaster Kinesiology, and I'm really proud to be part of that one. Mentors are important. I think probably the very first mentor I had was Dr. Duncan McDougall. He was my master's supervisor. But what was so great about Duncan is he really instilled confidence in his students. Like, he was not in our face all the time in terms of managing what we were doing. He really allowed us to kind of learn by doing and learn by failing. I've really taken those lessons from Duncan in the way I mentor my own students. I don't like to kind of manage their every step of the way. I like them to try things on their own and then report back to me how they worked out, to kind of fail as much as possible so that they can learn from the failures and then develop confidence that way that they can actually solve problems and figure things out, because science is never easy. There's always failures, and you really have to learn how to be creative in managing all the various bumps along the road. I find you learn the most from your students, because the students very often, they don't have the same preconceived notions that you might have in terms of how you think your research is going to unfold or what you think the answers might be to your questions. We hypothesize before we plan our studies how we think it's going to go. The students don't always have that same vested interest because they might not have been there at the beginning when you conceived of the actual path or project. And so they often might offer a different perspective to a result, or offer a different solution to a problem that I might not have thought about. So yes, I find I learn a lot from my students. I think as a new academic in a university type position, I think it's really important to not isolate yourself. I think when we get hired on as a position, or when many young people are getting hired these days, they're very much focused on establishing their labs and kind of continuing maybe whatever they had been starting in their postdocs or in their graduate training. And I think it's really important that you make connections as well, and that you try to make as many connections as you can in your new department or in your new university or within your organization. Because very often your career is not going to stay in one straight path. It's not like a straight shot in the corner pocket, to use a pool analogy. It often goes off the banks and you're going in another direction. So making connections, I think, is extremely important and should be done as soon as possible. It's so important that when we go out in the field and start telling people how to exercise and how much to do, that comes from a point of evidence, and that the person giving that advice has also had the necessary training to be able to give that advice soundly and to recognize if there's any risks with this particular client in giving that advice. And I think that's what, really makes our certification process. It may be the more rigorous of all the certification processes out there, but it far surpasses, the weekend seminar to kind of become a so-called fitness professional and then be advising clients on how to exercise. I think that's just fraught with danger and risk. And so I think having sort of the marriage, if you will, of the researchers and the professional practitioners within our association makes us strong. And yes, it is the ultimate form of knowledge translation, but there's all sorts of forms of knowledge translation as well. And, publications, what kind of publications are really important, getting the word out to healthcare practitioners beyond, say, kinesiologists. The whole exercise is medicine thing is a form of knowledge translation that's been a little tough to get off the ground, but I think it still has a future, hopefully, that we can get more buy-in from the medical field of the importance of using the evidence from the exercise scientists in terms of the importance of physical activity and exercise for their patients, and why it should be an important vital sign.